There will now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Thank you. You may be seated. Honourable members, before we proceed with the items on the order paper, I will recognize the Chief Whip of the majority party. The Honourable, the Chief Whip.
Thank you very much, House Chair, honourable members. I hereby move that the precedence be given to order number 2, which is on the order paper, debate on the 16 days of activism on no violence against women and children, empowering women to build resilience against gender-based violence and femicide, as it appears on the order paper, after which the House will then consider order paper number 1. I so move, Honourable House Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any objections to the proposal as the motion as raised by the Chief Whip? No objections, agreed to. Now I will ask the Secretary to read the first order as changed from the second order. Thank you.
Debate on 16 days of activism on no violence against women and children, empowering women to build resilience against gender-based violence and femicide.
Thank you very much. I will now welcome the Honourable Matuba, the maiden speech. Honourable Matuba.
Thank you very much, Honourable House Chair. This month marks an important month in our history. It's a month that reminds us that as South Africans, we need to intensify our fight against plights in our society, plights that find expression in the form of gender-based violence, femicide, patriarchy, and misogyny. The ANC fundamentally comprehends that these scourges against women are atrocities that need to be dealt with swiftly in order for us to attain a national democratic society based upon dignity and affirmation of rights in a constitutional democracy. Honourable House Chair, the founding provisions and the Bill of Rights as enshrined in chapters 1 and 2 of the Constitution establish women's rights in South Africa. The Reconstruction and Development Programme, mainstreamed non-sexism and women's emancipation, highlight the need to tackle women's unpaid labor employment discrimination. Credit constraints for women, inadequate early childcare and education, gender discrimination in a law enforcement and treatment of offenders, discriminatory treatment based on marital status or pregnancy, and insufficient public health services. The strategy and tactics of the ANC recognize women as a motive force necessary for the advancement of the national democratic revolution. It is within this context that women empowerment and gender equality need to be debated in the context of the history of women in the political economy of South Africa. The development of gender inequalities has been seen in the context of the evolution of society, in which the acquisition of property, colonial structure of economic relations, the Industrial Revolution, and rampant capitalist ideology emerged. These have profoundly contributed to gender inequality, and hence our history has been one of the struggles for land, pass law, social, economic, and political injustices in a discriminatory, unequal society. The Women's Charter for Effective Equality of the Gender National Policy Framework are regarded as a pivotal in gender transformation. In assessing progress since 1994 towards a non-sexist society and women's emancipation, research reports including the background paper by the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation on Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality as part of the 20-year review 1994 to 2014 and the 25th year review 2014 to 2019 on the empowerment of women and gender equality by the Department of Women. It had looked at the data and examined initiatives to look at the social, economic, political changes towards advancement of the status of women in our society. We are having this debate, Honourable House Chair, with a dark cloud over our heads as a nation. The recent South African crime report has indicated that the rate at which women are abused, violated, and killed in our economy, in our country is alarming. This is a serious indictment on all of us, as the fight against gender-based violence and femicide should be a responsibility of all of us. Honourable Chair, the ANC-led government during the 2022 SONA debate has made firm commitments towards strengthening of the criminal justice response and supporting survivors of gender-based violence. In January 2022, the president of the ANC and of the country, His Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa, signed into law anti-gender-based violence legislation that is aimed at strengthening efforts to end gender-based violence with specific emphasis on the victims. The amendment bills signed into law were criminal and related matters amendment bill, and also it was amendment bill and the domestic violence amendment bill. However, Chair, taking a cue from the 54th National Conference resolution of the ANC manifesto, and also quoting His Excellency President Ramaphosa, he said, open quote, the enactment of the legislation that protects victims of abuse and make it more difficult for perpetrators to escape justice is a major step forward in our efforts against this epidemic and in placing the rights and needs of victims at the center of our interventions, close quote. Honourable House Chair, the Gender, Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill provides the Minister with the necessary governance authority to monitor, review and oversee gender mainstreaming, to promote empowerment, ensure equal representation and meaningful participation of all women in decision-making positions and structure. The responsibility, however, to deal with gender-based violence is a societal one, and it cannot be reduced to government or the ANC-led government. Society requires all formations and all citizens to be mobilized behind a sustained program of social action. The Women's League aimed to ensure that women play a full role in the people's struggle and in nation building. It is, however, the ANC Women's League, together with its desk, the Young Women's Desk, and the LGBTQI, that have remained consistent in the fight against gender-based violence, patriarchy, and misogyny, and provided solace and other forms of support to the victims throughout the year. Ours is not only 16 days of activism, it's 365 days. We therefore commend all women who have played a critical role in addressing the plights they face. History teaches us that women have always been resolute in addressing these issues head on. I thank you.
Thank you. Again, we have a young woman, Honourable Kakao, who's also making a maiden speech.
Ke lebohe motsamaisi wa dipuisano. Honourable Chair, when the first Women's Global Leadership Institute initiated the 16 Days of Activism against Gender-Based Violence campaign in 1991, it did not imagine that 31 years later, this House would still be debating how to get the South African state to deliver us from this evil. The Institute did not imagine that in 2022, 148 women would be opening assault with grievous bodily harm cases in this country every day. That in South Africa, over 10,590 people would have been raped between July and September alone. And that the latest quarterly crime statistics would paint the painful picture of 536 cases of attempted sexual offenses, 1,895 cases of sexual assault, 262 contact sexual offenses, and the killing of 989 women. The bottom line is that as horrifying as these statistics are, they still do not factor everyone else who's battling with gender-based violence and femicide in silence. Honourable Chair, the Institute did not imagine that let's say lena itla re ha re ya dikantorong tsa maponesa re tla be re botswa dipotso tse tlontlollang tse diang moya tse re qosang jwalo ka hore na re ne re entseng ha re tla otlwa le hore na re ne re apereng ha re tla betwa. The Institute definitely did not imagine that 3 decades later, the president of a democratic South African government would choose an opportunity to score ANC political points over securing the lives and safety of women. Yes, Honourable Chair, President Ramaphosa has sold us out.
Order.
For him,
Order, honorable members. No, proceed. You are drowning the speaker. Just talk.
I repeat, Chair, President Ramaphosa has sold us out. For him, gender-based violence and femicide remain a mere conversation appetizer that is meant to make him and his government seem somewhat relevant or aggrieved by the pain of being brutally murdered, raped, and assaulted for simply being a woman. If this were not true, police stations would be safe spaces, and we would have seen an implementation of effective monitoring mechanisms for cases of GBV. If this were not true, he would have fired Minister Bheki Cele by now. Because we are cursed with a police minister who considers us lucky for being raped by one man instead of many.
Honorable Kakao, your chief whip's hand is up.
Honorable Chair, can you please ask that the members not drown out the speaker? It's really, we are battling to hear her.
Thank you, honorable members. Please, I said from the beginning that this is a maiden speech, which I believe, order. Let me say, let me talk, don't talk back to me. Honorable members,
But
the same as, even if you are making a maiden speech, you must reciprocate what the others are doing, because you really can't say what you want to say in your maiden speech in a different way. Proceed, ma.
Thank you, Chair. We wouldn't be cursed with a whole police minister that has absolutely no clue, nor care on how to deal with this plague. Chair, if this were not true, President Ramaphosa would have done more than to be shocked all the time and deliver a summit with no tangible and sustainable outcomes and progress to tackle gender-based violence head-on as his alpha and omega strategy. So what remains clear, Chairperson, is that President Ramaphosa and Minister Cele do not care about us, because under their watch, our blood and souls are mere sacrificial products. Through you, Honourable Chair, allow me to say this to Mr. President. President Ramaphosa, the first step to empowering women and in building resilience against gender-based violence and femicide is to appoint a minister that is capable, that cares and understands the mandate of the people he represents and serves. And that person is definitely not Minister Bheki Cele. So I dare you, Mr. President, choose us, honor your commitment to serve and to protect, get rid of Minister Bheki Cele with immediate effect.
Thank you.
Wait for your time.
I don't have a name for, Mam Maute.
Thank you very much, House Chair. Chairperson, in preparation for this debate, we have gone back at least 4 years, reflecting on the contributions we have been making. It is mind-boggling for us how Parliament, the executive and the judiciary have collectively held so many women who have been victims of heinous crimes committed by men against women and children in this country. In 2018, Chair, we spoke here about the brutal murder of Nokhanyo Mtalana, who was gunned down in Nyanga on the 8th of November while driving home from a prayer service. To date, those who murdered her were never arrested and her death was in vain. This is the failure of the police to protect women and properly investigate crimes committed against women. In the same year, Chair, we spoke about the bravery of young women like Cheryl Zondi, who stood up to the abuse of young girls who suffer in churches from the likes of pastors such as Tim Omotoso. While in this case of Omotoso, he's in jail, this case has not been concluded so many years later. This is the failure of the prosecuting authority and the judiciary. In 2019, Chair, we noted the brutal murders of Precious Ramabulana, of Uinene Mukhetlana, of Anene Boyzens, of Aviwe Velem, who were only a tiny fraction of thousands of women who get raped and killed every single year in this country.
Honorable Maute,
Yes,
just a minute. Honorable Jeffrey, I see your hand is up. Is that a point of order?
Sorry, House Chair, that was a mistake.
Thank you. Proceed, Ma.
Thank you, Chair. In 2020, we spoke about the brutal murders of Daniel Maestri, a final year student from Devon who was killed by a partner. We also noted the shameless murder of Naledi Pangindao, a 25-year-old from Mossel Bay, who was hacked and stabbed to death with an axe, allegedly by a partner, when she tried to end their relationship. We also noted, Chair, the inhuman killing of Tshegofatso Pule, who was 8 months pregnant and lived in Middlelands, Johannesburg, who was found with stab wounds and hanged from a tree in Rodiport. Last year again, Chair, as part of a larger group of women who succumbed to the violence perpetrated by men, we told this house of Mtombo Xolo Xobani, a 41-year-old woman, who was butchered to death by a strange husband in Delft, Cape Town. We spoke of Noscelo Mtebeni, a last year law student at the University of Fort Hare, who was murdered and a body was cut into pieces and stashed in a suitcase by Aluta Pasile, who was at the time alleged to be her boyfriend. We spoke, House Chair, of Nikita Maloney, a 20-year-old woman from Kwatsatu village, just outside King Williamstown, who was killed by the father of their then 7-month-old baby, even after she had gone to the police to obtain a protection order against the abusive boyfriend. Chairperson, we can go on and on. The reality is that this house, the executive and the judiciary do not care about the plight of women in this country. Chairperson, year after year, this debate has become a box-ticking exercise in this house because as we speak, a woman is murdered every 3 hours in this country. Over 150 women report being raped every single day in this country. In the most recent crime statistics, Chair, for the period between July and September this year, we learned that over 13,000 women were victims of assault. And that is only the number of cases reported to police stations. About 989 women were murdered and over 1,200 were victims of attempted murder. During this period, over 10,000 rape cases were reported to SAPS stations across the country. Chairperson, over the past 4 reporting quarters, rape cases across the country are consistently over the 10,000 mark, meaning that over 40,000 rape cases are reported in this country every single year. We know that Mthatha and Lusikisiki in the Eastern Cape
Delft in the Western Cape and Inanda and KZN are prime spots for these crimes. But what intervention has been done in these areas to deal with these crimes? SAPS and all those involved in the criminal justice system have done absolutely nothing to deal with these crimes. In fact, SAPS has basically told us that they have given up investigating the brutal murder of Nam Khamtwa in the Eastern Cape because there are no leads. It is for this hung approach to investigating crime that you only have a tiny fraction of these crimes leading to successful prosecution. While over 150 cases of rape are reported every day in this country, fewer than 30 will ever be enrolled for prosecution in court, and less than 10 will result in successful prosecution. Chair, that means that at any given point, there are possibly thousands of rapists and repeat rapists who are walking out our streets, tormenting women, and the state has absolutely no idea who these rapists are because we do not have the capacity to investigate these rape cases. This annual report of 16 days of no violence against women is meaningless to millions of women in this country who have nowhere to turn to. The abuse of women is not only limited to physical abuse, we also have a deeply embedded tendency of state-sanctioned violence against women in this country. We witnessed, Chair, what the chairperson of the Section 194 is doing to our public protector in that committee. It's nothing less than state-sanctioned abuse of a woman who dare to hold a different view from those with power. We also know that the police and prosecuting authority connived to have the woman who accused Mr. Godongwana, he was working here just now freely, of sexual assault to withdraw the cases. We know, House Chair, that those in power, even in this parliament, those who hold high offices, sanction the kidnapping and assault of a woman, female domestic worker at Palapala Farm. If men such as this are at the helm of perpetrating these crimes against women, what hope do ordinary women have of ever getting redemption? We'd like to call on all male members of society to reflect on their actions and to stop this crime against women, particularly to the members of the Economic Freedom Fighters. Let us start with the million members that we have recruited to instill a culture of respect
Thank
for
you,
women.
Honourable
No member of the
Mauche.
EFF must ever be found to have committed any sort of
monitor.
crime, particularly against women and children. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The Honourable Mamshengwa. Mamshengwa.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Honourable Chairperson, a women's rights activist recently said that women are dying in this democracy, and she posed the question of whether our country is at war with its women. Sadly, we cannot label this question as a controversial as gender-based violence and femicide has become a common occurrence, and children as young as 4 years old and subjected to sexual assault and alarming rates. In question our eagerness to frame this debate around the development of resilience, South African women in South Africa have been continuing to live their lives despite the possibility of becoming yet another gender-based violence statistic and story. South African women have an indescribable amount of resilience, as their existence in circumstances have always been dependent on their ability to survive in one of the most dangerous countries for women. In this not enough proof resilience? Is this not enough proof of resilience? Building resilience against murder and rape means accepting that it will always be there. Therefore, increasing your ability to stay alive, we need to start shifting the narrative and focus from resilient women to responsible men. What we should debate is why South African men are so angry that they deem it fit to take their anger out of defenseless women and children. Tell Every citizen in our society has a crucial role to play. As South African, we need to move from awareness to accountability. Government must be held accountable and implementing legislation efficiently and taking to task public servants who neglect their public service duty, especially those who take bribes and release perpetrators permanently or lose the workers. Inkatha Freedom Party ikhathazekile ngokuthi bakhongoza ngaphandle laba bathi esithi siyababopha ngoba sireyphile badlwenguleni ingane zethu. Kodwa umthetho ufika ubakhiphe uthi hayi abanabungozi abaphumele phandle. Sikhathazekile ke ngalokho. Sifuna uhulumeni aqinise lapha ya emakhaya kuma-policing forum abanikeza amandla okwenza izinto zenzeke ngoba izinto zenzeka lapha ya emphakathini lo anganakiwe. Sicabanga ukuthi akungabi nje 365 days obhaliwe kodwa awube 365 owenziwayo nozoqala nje ubunyaka qala nje kuze kuyophela unyaka. I thank you.
Sithokoze Mamhlengwa. Agbareli Tena.
Dankie, voorzitter. House Chairperson, we've heard a lot about programs, frameworks, and initiatives that government has in store to empower women to build resilience against GBV and femicide. But we cannot empower women without empowering society first. And society can only be empowered through a properly functioning education system, a functioning healthcare system, a functioning police force, proper service delivery, and a growing and prosperous economy. Over 13,000 women were reportedly victims of assault during the period July to September of this year. 989 women were murdered and 10,000 rape cases were opened with the South African Police Service. And these were only the cases that were reported to the police. There are many women who don't report the crimes perpetrated against them for fear of further victimization. With the shortage of rape kits at police stations, infrastructure, insufficient resources, and with approximately 1 police officer for every 408 citizens, continued victimization is often a result of a failing support system. Where is the activism? The delay in the establishment of sexual offences courts in contradiction with the President's promises in 2019 and backlogs at these courts, like the 200 pending cases at the Parow Sexual Offences Court by May of this year, destroys victims' confidence in the system. Honourable Matuba, by empowering the police and NPA, you will empower women. Voorzitter, 90,037 meisies tussen die ouderdomme van 10 en 19 het gedurende die tydperk Maart verlede jaar tot April vanjaar swanger geraak. En jaarliks word meer as 10,000 babas weggegooi, die meerderheid waarvan doodgevind word. Tienerswangerskappe hou ook direk verband met die uitvalkoers in skole. Volgens 'n verslag van Amnesty Internasionaal faal Suid-Afrika se onderwysstelsel die jeug van die land. Ons onderwysstelsel word gekenmerk deur verbrokkelende infrastruktuur, oorvol klaskamers en swak onderriguitkomste. Bemagtiging begin in die klaskamer, waar kinders toegerus word met die gereedskap om vir hulself 'n ekonomies volhoubare toekoms te skep. Hier misluk die ANC klaaglik. Waar is die sogenaamde aktivisme? 3.5 million of the 10.2 million young people aged between 15 and 24 are not in any form of employment, education or training. The unemployment rate is 43.1%. Nearly half of the economically active population of South Africa is jobless, and this includes demoralized and discouraged work seekers. This feeds into the pandemic of GBV. Hopelessness, despair, depression, substance abuse, a rise in crime and other social ills all increase with a high unemployment rate. An unemployment rate that is exacerbated by rolling blackouts, poor service delivery, poor economic growth, and a failing social support system. Women must be empowered through economic opportunities. Unemployment also compounds the pressure on the healthcare system, where 80% of the 60.4 million population is dependent on 420 state hospitals, where conditions are so dire that even the largest hospital in Africa, Chris Hani Baragwanath, is running out of food. You must empower women, Honourable ANC members, by ensuring they receive quality healthcare. Programs, plans and initiatives are a mere band-aid on the gaping wound that is GBV and femicide. True empowerment will only happen when children receive quality education, when victims of GBV and other crimes have the confidence and trust in the police to report these crimes, when these crimes are successfully prosecuted, when women and victims of GBV have access to quality healthcare and support services, and when women are enabled to take part in the economy, to provide for themselves and their children with pride. That is true empowerment. I thank you, House Chair.
Thank you. Mhlomphehi Moruti Mishwe.
House Chairperson, government has the power to reduce gender-based violence, particularly rape of women and femicide in the country. We are one of the top 5 countries in the world for femicide. At least a third of our women and teenage girls and boys have suffered sexual violence, and half of them have experienced physical violence. The highest number of rapes are taking place in residences, either of victims or perpetrators. And yet, surprisingly, government does not investigate the role of pornography in these ever-increasing rapes taking place in homes. The ACDB believes that pornography is the theory and rape is the act. Nobody's wife or daughter deserves to be raped because she had to walk home from work or school through the field. It is a shame that until today, only less than 10% of those arrested for rape are convicted. DNA samples that are taken for forensic laboratories for testing take years before they are finalized. The current DNA backlog numbers a massive 81,291 cases, with the ring-fenced backlog of cases a shocking 11,000. The ACDP is totally opposed to parole for those convicted of rape or murder. Bail for those accused of rape or murder must also be denied. Nobody should have to picket outside a court because they are afraid that a suspect or convicted perpetrator will be allowed back into the streets. Recently, 4-year-old Bokabopo of Wattville, Gauteng, was lured away from her friend in a park to be raped and murdered. Unbelievably, the suspect was out on bail for the rape of a 9-year-old girl at the time. If government is to show seriousness about ending GBV in this country, then they should take drastic steps to end this scourge. Among others, they should ban pornography. They should deny bail and outlaw parole for rapists. They should also end their cozy relationship with countries that deny women their rights. Is it not hypocritical for government to invite an Iranian foreign minister to visit South Africa without challenging their treatment of women or speaking in defense of women who are crying for liberation in that country? We know that for the past 2 months, the Iranian government has violently suppressed protests calling for women's rights. It is morally repugnant that our government, which claims to champion gender-based violence, would be silent when women are being harassed and arrested for claiming their rights. This invitation portrays the shallowness and hypocrisy of the ANC government statements and commitment to the fight against GBV. How can our government be so vocal about women's and children's rights, but then invite these suppressors of women to our country? The South African government has yet to utter a single word of support for the women and girls of Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. Mhlonishwa Kwakwa.
Thank you. Thank you, House Chair. 16 days of activism is a clarion call for the world to do something, and especially South Africa to do something to free our women and children from all forms of violence. We live in a country where gender-based violence is a pandemic and a widespread problem, impacting on almost every aspect of our lives. We must admit that it is systemic and deeply entrenched in our institutions. religions, cultures, and traditions in South Africa. We have an example, where we were shocked by GBV cases skyrocketing unbelievably during the COVID-19 pandemic, where more than 120,000 cases were reported or recorded by the government-run GBV Command Center in just the first 3 weeks of the national lockdown. Most types of violence in our country, from whether it be from physical, sexual, emotional, and financial nature, are almost always of a gender nature. And because of how gender and power inequalities are entrenched in our societies, and due to the culture of patriarchy, which has not relinquished its grip, leading men to perpetuate violence against women with impunity. It is critical to address these systemic forms of violence and the problems that occur as a result, as violence does not occur in a vacuum, but rather in a society that condones and encourages it. Regrettably, nearly 3 decades since the establishment of the Commission for Gender Equality and other institutions that seek to fight against gender inequality and gender-based violence, South African women still continue to face some of the highest levels of domestic and sexual violence of women found anywhere in the world. Children are being brutally murdered. Violent crimes committed against women and children recorded high and unacceptable levels, such that 855 women and 243 children were killed in less than 90 days in this country between the period of April and June. We have to do something to curb this. And while steps have been taken, for example, to amend and strengthen existing laws, such as the Criminal Law Amendment Act, Criminal and Related Matters Bill, and the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill, which were signed into law by the President recently, nothing is going to be achieved until that we ensure that enforcement of these happens on a daily basis, and we create an environment that is conducive for the implementation of all these important amendments. It is important that government strengthens and enforces the new legislative measures in order to end violence against women and children. In addition, the Department of Youth, Women and Persons with Disabilities and Social Development and SAPS and other related stakeholders should collaborate to strengthen educative programs aimed at empowering women and educating men about GBV, as ending violence against women and children in our communities is our collective responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have a name. Okay. The Honourable B.M. Hadebe.
Thank you so much, the House Chairperson. Our country is infested with many socio-economic challenges, with gender inequality ranging amongst them. In a country vast with gender inequality, women and marginalized groups such as children, persons living with disability, and members of LGBTQIA+ community are exposed to violence and usually carry the brunt of consequences of inequality. Annually, cases of gender brutality and gender injustice keeps on rising. Women, children, and the vulnerable are more impacted by the inequality than any other groups, are the most unsafe in our society. I fully concur with you, SG Honorable Madumba, that 16 days of activism of no violence against women and children should not only be from the month of November until December. Women and vulnerable in our country needs to be protected on a daily basis. We ought to ask ourselves, like Umam Hlengwa has done, why this veiled culture of violence in our society persists? Why do men in our society perpetuate violence against women and children and hunt them like animals so as to eliminate them from society? Why? Honorable House Chairperson, as a country, we continuously attempt to address gender-based violence and femicide with implementation of various strategic initiatives, such as the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, and other initiatives to alleviate gender-based violence and femicide. However, the number of gender-based violent cases still on a rise. This indicates that perhaps we are not dealing with the root cause of the problem, but we are addressing the phenomena or consequences of the problem. This is what I call a Panado or a grander approach. The violence perpetrated by men towards women is rooted in a patriarchy and the entitlement of men over women as their agents. Patriarchal oppression is embedded in the economic, social, religious, cultural, family, and other relations in our community. Dismantling the system of patriarchy in all its manifestation is imperative for the attainment of gender equality in our society. Part of dismantling the system of patriarchy includes addressing toxic masculinity embedded in the culture and religious practices. Perhaps as a society, we need to consider having uncomfortable conversation amongst ourselves to reconsider eliminating toxic cultural and religious practice that contribute to the detriment of our communities. In the same breath, we ought to uphold cultural and religious practices that promote positive masculinity in our community and society. The emphasis of these practices will counter the toxicity that is embedded in our society. The GCIS and the Department of Social Development must continue to host conversation on challenging the culture of toxicity masculinity to combat violence under the theme of moving toxic masculinity to positive masculinity, which seeks to highlight the role that the cultural toxic masculinity has in perpetuating gender-based violence and femicide. These are discussions that needs to take place in our country, and this discussion will take forward our country in addressing the root cause of toxic masculinity, which are entrenched in the patriarchal practice, not what we have just been subjected to by Pinky on my left here. They blame everyone else and say nothing positive.
Honourable Hadebe, Honourable Hadebe, please take your seat. Yes, Honourable Chief Whip of the Opposition.
House Chair, the member on the floor is talking about toxic masculinity, but he refers to another female member as Pinky. Can you please withdraw?
Honourable Hadebe.
Chair, I withdraw. I'm color
Who
conscious.
asked
I'm
you to
appreciating the
withdraw?
beauty of the color.
Don't just talk. Who asked you to do that? Because
All right.
I was still coming to you. We must respect the rules. You know that you can't do that. There's no Pinky in this house. There is an honorable member. I don't know who you are talking about, but please just withdraw. Proceed, honorable member. You can't do that.
No,
Proceed.
Thanks, Chair. I love colors, Chair. But honorable members in the platform, they stood up and blamed everyone else and saying nothing positive in terms of the solution and contribution that will put this matter on the agenda. Talking is cheap. Honorable House Chair, another matter that is central to the discussion is the role of family units.
Honorable Hadebe, please wait.
Please stop my time.
I stopped already. Once I say this, you must check it's off. Honorable Peacock and all honorable members on the platform, let's respect this house. You know, when you speak, there are other voices that are speaking. When you open, you unmute, and it tells us that you are not alone there. And we take that seat where you are as the seat in this parliament, in this house. Please, everyone check your microphones. We can't keep on stopping people. Proceed, Honorable Hadebe. I'm sorry for that.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. Another matter that is central to the discussion is the role of family unit. We have to rectify the destruction legacy left by apartheid evident in our democracy. Our society is engulfed by the legacy of apartheid, and it left South Africa with an unusual pattern of family structures, which mostly affects Black majority. Nearly half of the households are female headed, and it has led to what we see today, many children with absent fathers. This has major implication on both poverty as single parent household, and those headed by women are the poorest of the poor. Related, South Africa has high level of violence. This is likely due to the sense of powerlessness and aggression that comes with poverty, as well as the hype of masculinity that emerge as the means of overcompensate the lack of masculinity training that boys are missing from their absent fathers. As a society, we need to strengthen family structure for men to own up to their responsibilities and assume their parental role. For some boys, having no father or positive male role model can lead to emotional disturbance and aggression and violent behavior. Of course, this does not excuse the violent behavior of boys. However, I'm pinpointing the challenge that emerge from such a fractured family unit. We need to pay a special attention to socialization of both girls and boys in our community and broaden the society for us to achieve a non-violent society. This thing, Honorable Mawudo, of saying Umjolo Uyanyisa must come to an end. There is no such a thing. Once he starts laying your hands on you, walk away. For us to achieve a non-violent—
Honorable Hadebe, take your seat. Honorable Malazi.
It's a, yeah.
Please switch on your mic.
Mevrod, I mean, there's certain language that particularly coming from a man is problematic in a debate of this nature.
What are you talking about?
I can't repeat it because it's, I can't repeat it because I will be condoning the same, sexist elements that are in his speech.
There's something that he said that you are not happy about. I'll check that with Hansard. Thank you very much. Proceed, Honorable Hadebe.
No, thanks, Chair. Perhaps I must say it in English. We cannot perpetuate this culture that says love hurts and force our friends and partners to remain in the relationship on the auspices that love hurts. That's what I meant. Exactly.
Proceed, Honorable
There's no
Member.
such a thing as love hurts. We're dealing with the stereotype of gender-based violence. In closing, we are a wounded.
Order, honorable members, please allow the speaker, don't drown him.
But he must also finish, House Chair. He's been speaking nothing. He's been saying nothing. He must finish now.
Honorable Mauta, you don't do that in this house. You don't just switch on the mic and speak. Please don't do that. It's a warning. Proceed, honorable member.
We are a wounded population of people in pain. We must respond and address the psychological trauma that we're experiencing as people. Simply dealing with consequences of trauma will not address the problem. Rather, we must confront the essence of the problem if we are to uproot the social ills of the culture of violence in our country against women. I thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. AGM. The Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I hear a lot of talk. I hear a lot of attack on the police officers year in and year out. We come in and talk about exactly the same things. Well, I can assure you, Chairperson, that for the next 10 years or 15 years, we'll be talking about exactly the same thing. We'll be attacking each other, but that is not going to save our women and children in this country. I think we need to be realistic and honest about the root causes of why the levels of gender-based violence is so high, particularly in South Africa. And let us look at this very, very seriously. First of all, last year, 91,000 children, some as young as 10 years old, gave birth. Is that okay? Certainly not okay. Look at the levels of poverty in the country. Is it okay? It's clearly not okay. Let's look at this. 1 in 2 children start school and never finish school. 60% dropout in the first year. If you look at the living conditions, the number of homeless people, but more importantly, look at the availability of alcohol and drug abuse in the country. Look at the issue of taverns that are open 24 hours. Then, of course, you can't create a better society. 78% of Black children, Chairperson, do not have a father at home. 56% of colored children don't have a father at home. 22% of white children have no father at home. And 13% of Indian children have no fathers at home. Do you think this is okay? And you're going to solve this problem? Clearly not. So let's get to the root cause. If you want to solve the problem, we say start today. And this is how you start, Chairperson. Start in the schools. Make sure every child goes to school. Make sure every child stays in school until they complete their studies. Make sure you make school conducive so children don't want to come and stay in school. At the moment, no, they don't. Make sure that we deal with the issue of dysfunctional families through the school system. Introduce safety ambassadors can identify children coming from dysfunctional families or problems. Roll out social workers to go and deal with these people. Also, it's important that both mothers and fathers choose the parents that they want for their children, the fathers and mothers for their children. You cannot be going out and having babies at the age of 10 years and 11 years old. It's not acceptable. Okay, so these are some of the problems. We need to deal with the high levels of unemployment, the socio-economic conditions our people are living in. You have 10 people living in one shack, and we think that it's not going to go wrong. Most of these crimes are committed by perpetrators known to the victims living there. And here we're coming and blaming the South African police services. Is the police going to go and put an officer in every home? No. The entire community knows this abuse is taking place. They do nothing until the woman is raped or murdered, until the child is raped or murdered. That is when they act. Even civil society organizations who receive billions of rand, they go and grandstand when somebody is raped outside the court, no bail for the perpetrator. But what did we do to save our women and children? It starts with us, Chairperson. It starts with us in our very home, in our communities. Each and every one of us have to take collective responsibility to change the society in which we live. I thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. Honourable Weber.
It is shameful that the annual 16 days of activism against gender-based violence is still needed in a country that affords all its people, including women and children, the constitutional right to equality, life, and administrative justice. It is horrifying that we have to ask ourselves, honourable members, do South African women truly have the freedom to make choices and control the decisions and resources that determine their quality of life? In this day and age, the scourge of gender-based violence continues to disempower women. We are constantly living in fear of assault or rape at home, work, or while socializing, and we know that little will be done to protect us or bring the assailants to book. Men, sex is not a right. Too many men in this country do not understand that sex is a consensual act. No is no, and that real men do not rape women and children. They treat their partners and children like property and beat and abuse them. Child rapes are a dime a dozen in South Africa, yet justice is rarely seen. Genoeg is genoeg en ons vereis geregtigheid. Veilige omgewings vir vrouens en kinders word al hoe minder, en dit terwyl 115 vrouens daagliks verkragt word. Articles abound of children dying in horrendous circumstances, yet justice often remain elusive. Suid-Afrika val onder die top 50 gevaarlikste lande in die wêreld. Ons kwartaallikse misdaadstatistieke hou aan styg, skynbaar onverpoosd. Yet the backlog for DNA testing has yet to be eradicated. DNA testing is one of the most effective and credited resources available to ensure perpetrators of violent crimes are brought to justice. The DA has been raising the alarm on the challenges with DNA testing since 2019. 3 years later, the implementation of solutions is happening at snail's pace. Until the backlog is gone, there will be little, if any, consequences for rapists and violators, while their victims continues to live in fear. Little came of Police Minister Becky Cele's promises to have the backlog completely cleared by October this year. And I'll be very surprised if the extended deadline of January 2023 manages to be met. In the meantime, the brutality against the vulnerable are increasing and are becoming very alarming. Nearly every day, a new horror was brought to light by the media. Women beaten to death by their partners, raped, gang raped, cut into pieces, stabbed, burned by their neighbors, families, or friends, and children killed, raped, kidnapped, or maimed by those that were meant to love and protect them. Many gender-based violence instances are perpetrated by strangers, but the people we love and trust often pose an unexpected danger. Hoe verwag ons van vroue om effectief te functioneer in ons samelewing, te werk, om kinders te voed en te kleed, te onderrig en 'n huis vir hulle gesinne te skep, wanneer ons samelewing hulle nie as gelykes behandel nie? How many promises have been made to gender-based violence victims in the 31 years of the annual 16 Days of Activism program? Yet there seems to be almost, the DA run Western Cape that 25 active shelters to assist gender-based violence victims and continues to train LEAP officers to fight crime. There are also 8 Tutuzela centers with 24 hours medical services. The fight against gender-based violence should be inclusive in the school curriculum. Vroue en kinders in Suid-Afrika trek aanhoudend aan die kortste end. Government needs to join hands and assist the DA with our whole of society approach to combat gender-based violence. Empty promises will not be tolerated anymore. The women and children in this country are in the fight of their lives. We cannot win the war against gender-based violence alone. Women in South Africa have the right to be treated with dignity, respect, and equality. Women in South Africa deserve justice. Thank you.
Baie dankie. Me Maseko Jele.
Thank you, House Chairperson. Members, honorable members, fellow South Africans. Feminization of poverty is a phenomenon that has been used to understand and contextualize the patterns of rising living standard disparities between women and men as a result of widening gender gap in poverty. This phenomenon essentially highlights the persistent fact that women and children make up the majority of groups in society that are economically and socially marginalized. In South Africa, especially, our framing of this idea is underscored by the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. Women in South Africa have been oppressed and discriminated against on the basis of their gender, and the majority of South African women, their race and class position as well. This is the unfortunate history that continues to plague our society, even as it relates to the manifestation and scathing form of economic inequality. While in the democratic dispensation, efforts have been made to address the social economic disparities that exist between women and men, the social construction of the family and household structure, unemployment, poverty, and inequality, as well as gender-based violence and femicide, further entrench the face of poverty in South Africa as largely female, African, and queer. The reality of the gender pay gap is an example of the structural inequality that exists insofar as women access to financial resources and alternative forms of income. In South Africa, the gender pay gap continues to be a problematic area of redress and transformation, with women in South Africa making up to 35% less money than males' counterpart for doing labor of equivalent worth. This in a context where almost 38% of households rely on women's incomes in order to survive. Although in various sectors, there are some areas which mark progress. The work that still needs to be done in order to address this inequality across sectors is still significant. The global economic crisis has also affected women's ability to take care of themselves and their families. This over and above the documented gender disaggregated impact that COVID-19 has had on livelihoods and women's stability to unpaid domestic work, as well the increase in the occurrence of gender-based violence during the various stages of lockdown. The job losses that have been noted during this period contribute to the already existing imbalances in economic activity between women and men. According to Stats South Africa Gender Series Volume 15 report of 2017 to 2022, between 2017 and 2022, the country's overall unemployment rate increased by 6.8% points, increasing from 27.7% to 34.5% in both years. Female unemployment rates were higher than male unemployment rates, and provincial dynamics indicated that Eastern Cape, for example, had the highest unemployment rate. Males were more likely to be unemployed in short-term unemployment than females in both years, 55.8% in 2017 and 61.5% in 2022, vis-a-vis 44.2% and 38.5% respectively. These statistics reinforce the view that while women economic empowerment programs have been prioritized, the systemic nature of capitalist patriarchy is such that it fundamentally thrives on cheap and disposable labor, an approach which is not completely suitable for the South African economy. Women economic vulnerability serves as an enabler for gender-based violence and femicide to strive. This so because when women are not economically stable and in position to take care of their basic and other needs, they tend to become reliant on men in their lives, who, as highlighted previously, generally stand a better chance at being economically active than their women counterparts. This therefore inevitably serves as a basis for power relations between women and men to become enforced and creating a context where men exert violence on women. Intimate partner violence is one of the highest types of violence that women experience in South Africa. Almost 50% of cases of violence against women being attributed to intimate partner violence. Of course, the economic status of women is not the only reason behind intimate partner violence. However, it is tandem with the notable scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. Chairperson, in addressing this, it is important that as a way of contributing to the management of the GBVF and the liberating of women, that women be exposed to economic opportunities, as well as those that would enable to participate in food systems and the agriculture value chain in order for them to both sustain their livelihoods as well contribute to the economy, and being able to exercise their agency in order to be liberated from the cycles that perpetuate women's economic exclusion and vulnerability to gender-based violence. It is imperative that in its response to scourge of gender-based violence and efforts towards empowering women, that government departments and various entities contribute to enhancement of its capacity in order to create an enabling environment where women entrepreneurs in the SMEs and informal enterprise space are adequately supported, an environment is created for them to thrive. The call to connect, collaborate, and contract is imperative to the agenda of building women's reliance against gender-based violence and femicide. This is indeed the only way that social economic equity can be a reality
you.
for women of South Africa. I thank you.
Honorable Jafta.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The recent statistics released by the Department of Police mirrors a bleak picture of the plight of women and children in our country. Between July and September this year, 989 women were killed. We also heard that children are not spared. Over a period of 3 months, over 294 children were killed. This was amplified by the recent killing of 7 family members in the Eastern Cape. If there was any doubt that our criminal justice system is blunt, these recent statistics are instructive. They reveal a weak criminal intelligence system, including an inefficient policing system. Honorable Chair, there is no equal protection and benefit of the law for women and children in this country. They continue to be treated differently. Protection against them is weak and at best dismal. This calls for the pooling of financial resources to fund GBV programs, as well as the criminal justice system. We cannot leave anyone behind. And part of that inclusive drive is to invest in gender mainstreamed projects so that boy children are not left behind. Honorable Chair, we have to unravel these symptoms, the symptoms of gender-based violence, and not merely paper spray its wounds. In this regard, we must be firm in our messaging that toxic masculinity, patriarchy, gender stereotypes, sexism, and ukutwala must fall. I thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thokoza Mhlonishwa, Cope. Honorable Hendricks. Al-Jama. Akekho. Mhlomphehi Malatsi.
Ke a leboga modulasetulo. Every year, Parliament schedules this debate to showcase how it takes the fight against gender-based violence seriously. Government unleashes its PR machinery with the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence to somehow show that it cares about the rights of women. It's like all of a sudden, we all wake up from a slumber to the harsh reality that women's lives are under siege in South Africa. Yet every day, a woman is battered to death in South Africa by someone they once considered the love of their life. In each and every case of a murdered woman or a homophobic attack, the common denominator is a man or group of men known by others. And if truth be told, we need to do better as men. And it equally starts in this house. We all need to play our part to make our country a safe space for women and same-sex couples to enjoy the freedom of living without any victimization. From the young boys in our communities to those adults in our cycles of brotherhood, we must hold each other more accountable to squash chauvinism and misogyny.
Honorable Malatsi, just take your seat. The Honorable Minister Zulu.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Will the member take a question?
Honorable Malatsi, are you prepared to take a question?
I've got 4 minutes. 3 speakers didn't speak, so there's enough time after my speech to take your question.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
We need to educate each other better as men that we are not entitled to women's bodies. We need to empower each other that catcalling women is not sexy as some member tried earlier. We need to enlighten each other that gaslighting victims of gender-based violence is not cool at all. We must call out all sexist stereotypes in all spaces to dispel this notion that somehow there are sacred elements of a bro code. And as men who are leaders in society, we have a bigger responsibility to prevent gender-based violence, because our words and deeds have wide reach and carry powerful currency. But how can we truly make progress in the fight against gender-based violence when we have leaders such as the Minister of Police saying outrageous stuff such as women are lucky to be raped by one person at a time when South Africa has one of the highest rape statistics in the world? The latest quarterly crime statistics show that 10,590 rape cases were reported nationally between July and September 2022, representing a 10% increase compared to the previous year. And more than being a victim of the worst inhuman assault of their dignity, many of these women never get the justice they need because South Africa's criminal justice system is broken. The shortage of rape kits at police stations, coupled with the DNA backlog, means that far too many investigations in rape cases are botched to secure successful convictions. And far too many police officers don't have the required professional etiquette and the emotional intelligence to deal with gender-based violence cases. So we need an overhaul of the National Sex Offenders Register so that it can accurately identify specific sex offenders. This information can be easily accessed from the Department of Justice. And the truth of the matter is that ANC failures in government create an enabling environment for gender-based violence to thrive. So for all this talk about women empowerment and emancipation, the ANC and its tripartite alliance apply a different set of rules to their leaders. For example, an ANC councillor in a municipality in the Eastern Cape who was convicted of raping an ANC volunteer had been receiving his full salary despite being sentenced without any condemnation by his party. I can easily provide you those details. None of this is surprising because the ANC's institutional architecture is hostile to gender equality. How is it that in its entire existence, the ANC, its alliance partners, and its former youth league have never had a female president in their history?
And thank you very much. Thank you. Honorable members, please, let's allow the debate. I will now recognize the Honourable, the Deputy Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, the Honourable Jeffrey.
Thank you, House Chair. This is indeed an important debate. The 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children is an international campaign. It starts on the 25th of November, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and it ends on the 10th of December on International Human Rights Day. So it's an international campaign showing that it's a problem throughout the world, although yes, in South Africa, we do have a more serious problem of gender-based violence than most other countries. But it's not something that government has invented. We're participating in an international campaign. I remember the day as if it were yesterday. It was August 2019, 3 years ago, when we heard about the death of 19-year-old Uyinene Mkhwechana. She'd gone to the post office to collect a parcel, but she was raped and killed by a post office employee, Luyanda Botha. I remember listening to Margrasha Machel speaking at the memorial service for Uyinene saying, and she said, and I quote, "I had high dreams about my country and my Africa. Then I get to this age where I'm now planning to go somewhere where I think I will have real peace. And you say, what has happened? Where did we fail? How do we start to rebuild the social fabric of our societies? Where do we start and how?" And that's the end of the quote. And I thought surely now we've reached the point where South Africans across race and gender lines, across ethnicity, across socioeconomic status, across party lines would take a united stand against gender-based violence and say enough is enough. And House Chair, I think what has been disappointing with this debate is that some parties have chosen to seek the opportunity to try and score points, to try and blame government, whereas this is a societal problem that is facing all of us. And when it comes to gender-based violence, Honourable Malachi, in all our parties generally, there's problems we are facing problems on this issue. The DA is not exempt. But 3 years have passed and gender-based violence and femicide is as much of a scourge today as it was then. We are, as President Ramaphosa has said, a nation still at war with itself. Now, various speakers have given the crime stats, which are much, much, much too high. They're horrendous. And while we refer to crime statistics, and while crime statistics have a place in the methodology of monitoring and deterring crime, we must remember that, as Margracia Marcel also said, we need to stop speaking of violence against women as statistics. And she said, and I quote, "Each one of these women has a name, an identity. Let us find a place to write every single one of their names so they are never forgotten." Of all the women who were murdered, each one was someone's daughter, someone's sister, or someone's mother. So who is committing these crimes? It's not aliens from some other planet that descend on us and kill and beat up women. It's not aliens from another country. It's men in South Africa. These are our fathers, our grandfathers, our sons, our brothers, our uncles, our nephews, our male colleagues. It's men we know, men who live under our roofs, who walk in the streets, who live in our communities. We know the perpetrators, they're not strangers. We know who they are, where they live, yet we seem to have normalized these levels of brutality. And I'd like to echo the words of some of the previous speakers who also were raising these issues. Some of the previous speakers have touched on the measures and interventions that government has put in place to strengthen our response to gender-based violence, such as our sexual offences courts, which incidentally, Honourable Dena, there's not a delay in establishing them. They're being rolled out. And also, just while I'm with the Honourable Dena, it is quite remarkable that somebody from your party will complain about the general socio-economic conditions of all the people of South Africa, particularly Black people. I remember HF Verwoerd allegedly said Black people didn't need education. Why? Because they're just going to work in the garden. That's the legacy of your partner, Honourable Dena, of your party, Honourable Dena. But, so I spoke about the sexual offences courts. Another initiative is the Thuthuzela care centres. I was a bit disturbed that Honourable Weber spoke about the fact that there are 8 sexual offences courts in the Western Cape as a DA success. TCC's Thuthuzela care centres are from national, they're run by the NPA. But let's not score points. That's the point I'm making. Let's not score points. Let's work together to combat the scourge rather than saying we're better than you are as DA or ANC because we've done X or Y. The reference has been made to the 3 acts that the House passed. The Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act expands the scope of the National Register for Sex Offenders. I'm not sure what Honourable Malachi was referring to when he wanted an overhaul. It now includes the particulars of all sex offenders, not only sex offenders against women, against children and persons who are mentally disabled. It also expands the list of persons who are to be protected to include other vulnerable persons, namely certain young women, persons with physical, mental or intellectual disabilities, and persons over 60 years of age who, for example, receive community-based care and support services. The second act, the Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Act, amends the Magistrates Court Act to extend the appointment of intermediaries for witnesses in additional categories. Previously, it was just for children, as well as providing for the giving of evidence through intermediaries in proceedings other than criminal proceedings. So you can, in a civil matter, give evidence through an intermediary. It also amends the Criminal Procedure Act to further regulate the granting and cancellation of bail, the giving of evidence by means of closed-circuit television or similar electronic media, and the right of a complainant in a domestic-related offence to participate in parole proceedings. And Honourable Meshwe, you've been here since 1994. You play to the gallery. We cannot deny the court's right or the court's power to decide whether a person gets bail or not. We can tighten the bail positions, the bail conditions, but ultimately it's up to the court to decide whether bail should be granted or not. The other two acts are in effect. The Domestic Violence Amendment Act, which is coming into effect, acknowledges that violence is not always physical. It can take other forms. That's why the amended legislation includes definitions such as controlling behavior and coercive behavior, and expands existing definitions such as domestic violence to also include spiritual abuse, elder abuse, and or exposing or subjecting children to certain listed behaviors. The enactment of these pieces of legislation makes it more difficult for perpetrators to escape justice, and this is a major step forward in our efforts against the scourge and in placing the rights and needs of victims at the center of our interventions. But laws can only do so much. It's the people who have to observe those laws, and we need society to accept and understand that these laws need to be observed. We're also implementing a number of interventions, such as the various pillars of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence. Some of these interventions include GBV service delivery training to all service providers, such as police, prosecutors, magistrates, intermediaries, court preparation officers, and healthcare providers. What this means is practice is that when a GBV survivor goes to a police station or to a hospital or to a court, the officials working there must be trained to handle the matter competently and with sensitivity and compassion. Police officials know that if they send a person who's come for a protection order home without such an order, they may be sending her to her death. Police officials know that no woman should be sent home and told, go and fix things at home. So as we enter another 16 days of non-violence against women and children, we need to once again stress that incidents of gender-based violence are human rights violations. We need to look at as some of the previous speakers have done, more closely at the systemic causes of violence against women from a political, economic, social, and educational point of view. We also need to look at the underlying causes of toxic masculinity and how to prevent patriarchy or misogyny when we raise our boys. We need to break the silence. Violence against women and children often goes unrecognized and unreported because people don't talk about it. And again, I want to make the point, we can tighten our laws, but we've got to get people in society to abide by them, to respect those laws. Government can pass the best laws, can put in place the most progressive policy measures, and have summit after summit. But until such time as we agree that men and men's attitudes towards women are the problem, and thus men need to be part of the solution, we will not eradicate gender-based violence. Gender-based violence happens in our country because men do not respect the rights of women and girls to be treated equally. Why is it that society has no problem when men speak of a side chick or a spare wheel, but if a woman does the same, she's judged and criticized? Why is it okay for one gender to have a spare wheel, but not the other? Why do some men still regard women as their possessions and violently assault or kill them when they as much as suspect them of cheating? These are questions we need to ask ourselves, our sons and men in society. It's because of patriarchy and toxic masculinity that our levels of gender-based violence are still shockingly high. Every single person can be an activist against gender-based violence in a number of ways. For example, by challenging cultures and practices which perpetrate gender inequality and thus result in the abuse of women and children. Do not protect abusers, report them. Protect children from exposure to violence and harmful content on the internet and social media. Seek help if you are struggling with harmful behavior such as alcohol and substance abuse. Every one of us can play our part to stop gender-based violence. I want to conclude by once again referring to what Margrasha Michelle said at the memorial service of Uyinene. She said, and I quote, This is a call for all South Africans. This is not the country we fought for. This is not what we wanted for our people, to be afraid and to look over their shoulders when they move around. We have the power and the capacity to change this. And in closing, House Chair, I would appeal to members to stop politicking on this issue. It is too serious an issue. We need to combine our efforts to eradicate gender-based violence in South Africa. Thank you, House Chair.
I thank you, Honourable Member. That concludes the debate. We now move to the first order. The Secretary will read the first order.
Consideration of report of Joint Committee on Ethics and Members' Interests on alleged contravention of Code of Ethical Conduct and disclosure of members' interests. Honourable Pinky Kekana, MP, Deputy Minister in the Presidency.
I'm informed that there is agreement that there will be no declarations taken. Once we have adopted the report, I will proceed to issue the reprimand to the member concerned as recommended. I now recognize the Honourable, the Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Enkosi obekekileyo uSomlomo. Somlomo nalendlu yowiso nokuqindomthetho. Phakamisa into yoba le ngxelo mayamkelwe yilendlu. Enkosi kakhulu.
I thank you, Honourable Member. The motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections? Okay. Honourable Mente?
We object to the report.
Okay, the objections of the EFF will be noted. Is there a request? There are no declarations and therefore there is no division. So no objections agreed to. One objection, Honourable Mente. Now, at this point, honourable members, the House has now adopted the report. The report recommends a reprimand. A reprimand in the House is a public act aimed at ensuring that discipline is meted out fairly, transparently, and applied consistently. I hereby now issue the reprimand. And I request the member to stand whilst I issue it. Honourable Kekana. The charge of breach of the Code of Ethical Conduct and disclosures of members' interests for Assembly and Permanent Council member, which you have been found guilty of by this House, is serious. In terms of the Constitution, before members begin to perform their functions, they must pledge faithfulness to the Republic and obedience to the Constitution. They pledge to also obey, respect, and uphold the Constitution and all other law of the Republic, and to perform their functions as a member to the best of their ability. The Code of Ethical Conduct and Disclosures of Members' Interest is intended to provide a set of ethics, principles, and values for members in relation to which decisions, actions, or judgments can be made when discharging their duties and responsibilities. It comprises such minimum ethical standards of behavior that are expected of public representatives, including upholding propriety, integrity, and ethical values in their conduct. Members must strive to abide by and uphold these standards. One of the principles, namely integrity, requires that members steadfastly avoid placing themselves under any financial or other obligation to any outside individual or organization where this creates a conflict or potential conflict of interest with his or her role as member. You have fallen short of this and breached the code by not disclosing the benefit that accrued to you.
and which had the potential to create a conflict of interest as a member of this House and as a public representative. The code further clearly stipulates that its purpose is to create public trust and confidence in public representatives and protect the integrity of Parliament. Your actions had the potential to erode both public trust in Parliament and the integrity of the institution. Where a member is in doubt as to whether any financial interest must be disclosed or not, the member must at all times act in good faith and err on the side of caution by disclosing such interest in the interest of transparency and to hold the public's trust, faith, and confidence. Members are required to fill out their disclosures fully every year. You had the obligation and duty to do this, and you did not do so. As a member, you should always make an effort to act in accordance with the set of ethics, principles, or values contained in the code to ensure transparency in the way you perform your functions and guarantee that you remain accountable as a public representative. Failure by members to do so effectively hinders Parliament's efforts to build and uphold public trust, faith, and confidence in democratic institutions such as ours. I thank you, Honourable Member. You may be seated. Order. The Secretary will read the third order.
Consideration of report of SADC PF Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women Advancement and Youth Development on enhancing Parliament's response in prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls during pandemics to 50th Plenary Assembly.
Thank you. I will now call on the Honourable Muyela to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, House Chair. Sanbonan, South Africans. Since the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, emerging reports have shown that several types of violence against women and girls have intensified. Gender-based violence is known to be widespread in the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and present a major obstacles to attaining gender equality and equity. The regions received reports of abuse of intimate partner violence, sexual harassment, child marriage, female genital mutilation, domestic and sexual abuse of women and girls, and that this has been exacerbated.
On a point of order, Chair. Honourable Mentor, sorry, Honourable Muela, just a minute. Yes, Honourable Mentor.
Chair, no, this is not in order. It's inappropriate. We're introducing a report, a very progressive report from SADC, and a person doesn't have a video, a person is not in the house.
Honourable Member.
It's very much inappropriate.
No, that's not how we work.
About 16 days of activism. This
Honourable Mentor, please. That's not a point of order. People are not here all the time. We allow them to speak. No. Doesn't work that way. Honourable Muyela, please proceed.
Thank you very much, House Chair. The region has received reports of abuse of intimate partners, violence, sexual harassment, child marriage, female genital mutilation, domestic and sexual abuse of women and girls, and that this has been exacerbated by COVID-19 lockdowns. The SADC Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women Advancement and Youth Development sought to document the sharp increases in gender-based violence by outlining the consequences, emerging priorities, promising practices, and highlight their potential to actively support and protect women and girls from gender-based violence as a standard part of a response to COVID-19 pandemic in the region. The meeting also sought to outline some practical evidence-based recommendation to SADC member state and other stakeholders to ensure that actions against gender-based violence were mainstreamed and in their COVID-19 response and recovery activities. Presentation House Chair in the meeting highlighted recent trends and emerging forms of gender-based violence in the SADC region, the need to a comprehensive legal and policy framework and SADC strategy and framework of action of addressing gender-based violence in 2018 to 2020. The recommendation, therefore, that emerges from the Standing Committee on Gender Equity, Women Advancement and Youth Development require the attention of Parliament, and this can be summarized as follows, House Chair: to urge Member Parliament of SADC to provide policy advice to SADC states on integrating gender-based violence in national and subnational COVID-19 response plans and budget. To also urge Member States to create an enabling policy and legal framework, resources environment, and the national action plans for the elimination of violence against women and girls. To urge Member States to adapt and scale up of evidence-driven prevention, programming such as comprehensive, accessible, and quality service for survivors of gender-based violence. To further encourage Member States to create an enabling and empowering environment for autonomous girl-led and women rights organizations to exercise their expertise in addressing gender-based violence and to prioritize women involvement in the parliamentary response to COVID-19. To also appeal, House Chair, to SADC governments to adopt a holistic approach to ending gender-based violence and to coordinate and unite entities to prevent and eradicate violence, including through implementing well-resourced national strategies that outline roles and responsibilities and risk-based approach that could be applied before and during after COVID-19. And to also encourage Member States to reinforce reporting gender-based violence, to understand the status in order to inform prevention and response initiatives, including reporting on gender-based violence to SADC Council and to the head of state summit. To further urge Member States to incorporate anti-violence messages and available resources in social, psychological, health, and legal services for available survivors into mass media and social media campaign to ensure that women's centers, shelters, domestic violence helplines, police protections, legal aid, and other critical services were identified as essential services. In conclusion, House Chair, the committee called for a protection on and promotion of the rights of women and girls should be prioritized. National strategic plans for COVID-19 preparedness and response must ensure meaningful participation of affected groups, including women and girls, in decision-making and implementation.
Thank
in
you.
this regard, SADC members should intervene.
Thank you, Honourable Muela. Your time has expired. Thank you very much.
I love you, Honourable Mente. Bye.
I will now recognize political parties wishing to make a declaration. The DA.
Thank you. The House today offers a reflection on the Southern African Development Community progress since the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. The region noted that gender-based violence was known to be widespread in the SADC region, and it presented a major obstacle to attaining gender equality and equity. The region had reports of abuse such as intimate partner violence, sexual harassment, child marriage, female genital mutilation known as FGM, domestic and sexual abuse of women and girls that had been exacerbated by the lockdown. Based on the presentations made before the Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women Advancement and Youth Development, it was noted that despite enacted laws and policies and various programs in the SADC region, gender-based violence remained a significant problem with new forms continuing to emerge. According to the World Health Organization, intimate partner violence was estimated to have increased by 13% across the world and 20% across sub-Saharan Africa. Actual experiences of violence were higher than the data indicated, as many women did not report the violence due to various barriers that existed. Although gender machineries existed in the region, they were under-resourced and not all countries had national action plans. The theme for the meeting of standing of COVID-19 pandemic. And as a resultant lockdowns in the SADC region, the meeting sought to document the sharp increases in gender-based violence by outlining the consequences, emerging priorities, promising practices, and highlight their potential to effectively support and protect women and girls from gender-based violence as a standard part to the response of COVID-19 pandemic in the region. The meeting also sought to outline some practical evidence-based recommendations to SADC member states and other stakeholders to ensure that actions against gender-based violence were mainstreamed in their COVID-19 response and recovery activities. House Chair, it is a major concern that SADC member states continue to experience impediments to access to justice, policing, health and social services, shelters, psychosocial counseling, and multi-sectoral coordination in governance. In addition, there was inconsistent quality survivor-centered services. It was noted that age, disabilities, and socioeconomic status, conflict and disasters, and sexual orientation further contributed to the marginalization. In combating these concerns, the SADC strategy and framework of action for addressing gender-based violence 2018 to 2030 was seen as a key component in this fight. It is anchored on 5 main objectives, including prevention and early identification of gender-based violence by addressing associated social, cultural, and religious issues, delivery of effective and accessible protection, care, and support services to gender-based violence victims. The Standing Committee resolved, amongst other things, to implore all member states to create an enabling policy legal framework, resource environment, and national action plans for the elimination of violence against women and girls. At this stage, House Chair, South Africa has not been able to introduce legislation that begins the work of combating gender-based violence. At the Presidential Gender-Based Violence Summit, the President proudly announced the introduction of the National Council of Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Bill, which in fact has not been introduced to Parliament. Instead, he misled South African civil society and NGOs that indeed the legislation was introduced. This, honorable members, should tell us all we need to know about where this government is. Thank you.
Thank you. The EFF. Isitulo lesibasibekele isayidi le. Thank you.
Manibulele Chair, ngicela undiprotect abantu bakho baya attack. Ndiyabulela Chairperson. Chairperson, the very nature of the structuring of our society makes it extremely difficult for women to cope with any sort of disturbance to their lives. The patriarchal and exploitative nature of our society towards women makes it difficult for women to assert themselves and lead their lives without undue influence from men, especially Black women. We therefore commend the SADC Parliamentary Forum for taking the initiative and prioritizing the question of gender equality and the prevention of violence against women and girls during the pandemics. On our arrival in the last Parliamentary Forum, Chair, a girl from Zimbabwe had resorted to losing cow dung as a sanitary towel. Those are the problems that young women are faced with in the SADC region. From our own experience in this country, that during the lockdowns from 2020, there were spikes in the levels of domestic violence against women in the country. Women could not even find escape routes from violence that normal working hours provided and were forced to stay with abusive men during this period. Our government and perhaps governments across the region never thought of how our homes will be like prisons.
The isolation brought about by lockdowns increased violence against women, and that is what the UN Refugee Agency noted right across the continent. The report quotes a variety of factors such as underfunding of essential services for women and girls are affected by violence, restrictions in mobility and lockdowns, school closures, loss of income, and poor support, limited and change available referrals services for survivors, perceptions and bias from service providers that deferred reporting, lack of information on available services, heavy reliance on technology, lack of investment and reach of social protection measures, pre-COVID, pre-existing gender inequitable forms. These are the problems that exist even here at home. We must change that situation. This chairperson calls for a rethink in the manner public policy decisions are made, particularly those that affect the safety and security of the most marginalized members of society. The recommendations made by the Standing Committee for Member States to incorporate interventions aimed at reducing violence against women in almost all public service interventions is welcomed. We are an already violent society. The Minister of Police will attest to that, where women over than 150 are raped every single day. Imagine what will be a situation where you have no other alternative but to sit at home with a monster. Even without the impact of the pandemic, our society was already ridden on a slippery slope. Parliament must do better to hold the executive to account. Minister of Police, we must make sure that our schools are safe. Just yesterday, a deputy principal in Limpopo was caught by society, and that community dealt with a rapist that raped a child in the precinct of the school. We need to change the security measures in our schools. The fact that there is just a watchman is not enough, because the principals and the teachers themselves are a danger to the children we send to school. We plead to all the men, please take care of women. Please take care of a girl child. SADC agrees. We support the report.
Thank you. The IFP.
Thank you, Honourable House Chair. The Criminal Law Amendment Act, the Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Act, and the Domestic Violence Amendment Act forms part of the South Africa's legislation geared at combating gender-based violence. However, during the first 3 weeks of the national lockdown in South Africa, more than 120,000 cases of gender-based violence were recorded by the Gender-Based Violence Command Center. And according to research prior to the coronavirus outbreak, our country already had 5 times higher than the global average for gender-based violence, while the female interpersonal violence death rate was the 4th highest out of the 183 countries listed by World Health Organization in 2016. Allow me to re-emphasize the report's statement that national strategic plans for COVID-19 preparedness and response should have been grounded in strong gender analysis to ensure meaningful participation of affected groups, including women and girls. In decision and implementation, South Africa has an impressive 46% women representation in Parliament because of the ANC's policy of 50% representation for women. However, what has the women in Parliament done to spearhead COVID-19 response policies against gender-based violence? Short answer, not enough. Evidence of this is the fact that the South African government was forced to draw up a national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide by the pressure they faced from the total shutdown movement in 2018. Women's representation in Parliament without substantive action, passing legislation without properly implementing it, and drafting gender-based violence plans without adequately resourcing its objectives means absolutely nothing. Shelters for domestic violence are still underfunded by government, and one-stop Tutuzela care centers at police station to treat rape victims with the necessary sensitivity are being rolled out too slowly. And all of this is topped off by the fact that the establishment of the National Council on Gender-Based Violence, the center agency that's supposed to coordinate official responses, has been stalled since 2012. While we are cognizant of the fact that there is no simple response for how to reduce gender-based violence in our country or the Southern African Development Community, it is our job as members of Parliament to ensure that all interventions are contextual and that we aim at unhealth to a multi-dimension problem that underlie gender-based violence. The IFP supports the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. FF Plus.
Thank you, House Chairperson. Chairperson, the findings of the SADC Parliamentary Forum's Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women Advancement and Youth Development are not a surprise and just proves what we see in our country on a daily basis. What it further proves is that we as a continent are becoming more violent, that GBVF is out of control, and that we need to step up our responses. What was also shocking is that according to the World Health Organization, intimate partner violence was estimated to have increased by 13% across the world, but staggeringly increased by 20% across sub-Saharan Africa. Also, actual experiences of violence were higher than the data indicated, as many women did not report the violence due to various barriers that existed. Some of the other observations that were made include that despite laws, policies, and various programs, enactment thereof remained low. Gender machineries were found to be under-resourced, and although there was a strong trend towards civil societies, it was found that more partnerships were needed. A number of SADC member states have little to no access to services like justice and policing, health, social services, shelters, psychosocial counseling, and multi-sectoral coordination. The pandemic further exacerbated intimate partner violence and other forms of violence, such as child marriage and exploitation. A number of other factors are, as mentioned previously, restrictions in mobility and lockdown, school closures, loss of income, poor support, limited and changed available referral services for survivors, perceptions and bias from service providers, lack of information on available services, lack of investment and research of social protection measures pre-COVID-19. There have been a number of responses from SADC member states. Zambia, for example, ratified several international conventions and declarations. You can, however, ratify as many international conventions as you wish, but if you do not focus on the implementation thereof, ensure that various sectors dealing with GBVF are capacitated and that victims feel safe to report such crimes, you will always fight a losing battle. The committee made a number of recommendations that urge and implore member states to ensure there is responsiveness, legislation, and programs that not only combat the scourge of GBVF, but also creates an environment in which victims will be able to report these crimes without fear of discrimination. It is actually sad that we need to create and adopt recommendations to ensure this. What I would, however, have wished to also see in this report was an urge to ensure enactment of laws and capacity building of the necessary government institutions. But the long and short is that the women and children of sub-Saharan Africa deserve better. They do not need more words, but they need more action. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. ACDP.
Thank you, House Chair. House Chair, the ACDP has taken note of this report, and it is the theme of the meeting for the Standing Committee was to bring to light the rise of gender-based violence as an aspect of the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant lockdowns in the SADC region. Now, South Africa, as we know, had one of the world's longest and harshest COVID-19 lockdowns and was not spared the scourge and the increase that the statistics showed. That lockdown led to thousands of businesses closing and millions of people losing employment. And of course, as the Honourable Mente pointed out, that homes became prisons and a lot of abuse took place in those homes, despite the best actions of people trying to prevent that. Sadly, many clergymen and faith-based organizations were not granted essential service status to be able to counsel and assist those women and children that were experiencing this violence taking place. Now, this SADC report is very important because, as other speakers have indicated, it quotes the increase of intimate partner violence, 13% across the world and 20% across sub-Saharan Africa. And it is sad because clearly what we debated in the previous debate of 16 days of activism is broader, and one sees that also in the SADC region. But one does, as the ACDP, we welcome this report and we welcome the fact that a number of issues were highlighted, practical evidence-based recommendations to SADC member states and other stakeholders to ensure that actions against gender-based violence were mainstreamed in the COVID-19 response. But clearly, we need to make sure we never have such a severe lockdown ever to take place again, because that, in South Africa's context, caused a lot of the gender-based violence and the increase. Member states in this context were urged to take various action steps, including to incorporate anti-violence messages and available resources and social, psychological health and legal services available for survivors in mass media to make that communicable. And also to ensure that women's centers, shelters, domestic violence helplines, police protection, legal aid, and other critical services were identified as essential services. And I would add faith-based organizations as well. And identify safe spaces where victims could report abuse without alerting perpetrators. The ACDP would like to thank the participants in this very important discussion. We'd like to thank this report, and in particular, the Honourable Kate Belankulu, who represented South Africa at the SADC Forum. We support this report. I thank you.
Thank you. The UDM, ATM, good, NFP.
Thank you, Chairperson. The National Freedom Party will support the report tabled here today by the Standing Committee at SADC Parliamentary Forum, particularly to deal with gender equality, women advancement, and youth development. Chairperson, the entire African continent appears to have a serious problem when it comes to gender-based violence. Some of the problems are cultural, religious, some of the things like kutwala, child marriages, patriarchy. Men have very little or no respect for women, but also migration plays a key role in this. Some of them migrate for economic reasons, absent fathers more often than not. You know, Chairperson, the most difficult thing to accept in the African continent is this, that it's one of the richest continents in the world. It has everything, but in the end, it has nothing, because whatever it has is in the control of others. Unless this African continent, and particularly the SADC region, becomes self-sufficient and finds solutions to its own problem, the challenges that women and children face in the SADC region will continue. Let me welcome any initiative, particularly this one, and congratulate all those who represent us at SADC level for the role that they are playing, being able to deal with the challenges of gender-based violence, particularly in the SADC region. We talk about gender equity, but yes, indeed, when it comes to high-profile positions, managerial positions, political heads, then there's very little or no space for women. And the question that you ask is, who are the ones that really you find at the voting stations? Who are the ones that really bring in the votes? So the women go out there, sacrifice, bring the votes for the men, but men are not willing to accept that women can play a major or pivotal role in the success of the SADC region as well. So in supporting this, Chairperson, a lot of work needs to be done. But what I want to urge the SADC region, there is no point in us doing motions and motions and motions. It must be converted to action. We must implement these motions. We must make a difference in all these SADC states and countries, so that our people can have a better quality of life. And I want to urge them today, start, you've lost the war on even the teenagers, you've lost the war. At least start with the young ones, right from grade R today, and 20 years from now, you reap the benefits of that effort that you put in ensuring that we protect the children who are the future generation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The AIC, COPE, PAC, Al-Jama, the ANC.
Bakeng sa msamo xitulu na ka maAfrika-Dzonga hinkwenu enhlekani. The ANC in its 54th National Conference recommitted to work for a better Africa and a better world. It is also committed in assisting with finding solutions for African challenges towards attainment of peace, prosperity, and equitable development across the African continent. In considering the SADC Parliament Forum Subcommittee on Gender Equality, Women Advancement and Youth Development recommendations, the ANC takes this recommendation as a call to action. In many respects, the fact that we have developed our own national strategic plan and gender-based violence and femicide, and we are now in phase 2 of its implementation, many of the recommendations of the subcommittee are matters that are already fully engaged with. While it's the focus of the subcommittee presentation of the 50th plenary session was on increase of violence against women and girls during pandemics, specifically COVID, our focus has got to be on the eradication of the pandemic, which destroys the very fabric upon with that we are trying to contrast our national democratic society. So while the focus was on COVID, we will not be blaming COVID for increasing the violence, but rather analyze the reasons why the violence exists in the first place, as the report clearly indicates, and I quote, gender-based violence was known to be widespread in the Southern African development community and presented a major obstacle to attaining gender equality and equity. The region has had report of abuse such as intimate partner violence, sexual harassment, child marriage, female genital mutilation, domestic and sexual abuse of women and girls. Therefore, our response as a parliament of SADC needs to be commiserable with the analysis of the correct analysis of the challenge. Let us bet clear the legacy of a colonial political economy in the SADC region, in which families become displaced and scattered in order to serve the often migratory labor system, has had a hugely negative impact and provided fertile ground for gender-based violence to flourish. This analysis is slightly absent on the SADC report, and it shows a weakness. There is, and it remains, a direct correlation between the political economy of Southern Africa and gender-based violence, of course, exacerbated by COVID. This is what Parliament and the heads of state summit must address with agency. For the ANC, what we can practically contribute, our specific high impact economic intervention, which are centered on increasing access to childcare and promote gender equitable domestic labor through legislative amendments, improving the affordability and availability of childcare options for women in both the formal and informal sector, and addressing the social norms that drive the gendered nature of the distribution of household labor. To improve the school to work transition in science, technology, economics, and maths, frontier skill sectors by promoting girls' access to this subject at the secondary and tertiary levels. Addressing the legacy and social barriers to gender equitable entry, and reiteration in the workforce through legislative amendments that promotes pay transparency and identifies sectoral targets for women in inclusion. Also to improve financial inclusion and entrepreneurship of women by introducing the professional procurement targets, strengthening women-focused business development service, strengthening women's financial literacy and access to credit. Strengthening women's voice and agency by addressing women's roles in decision-making structures for the local level up and high level of gender-based violence and HIV and AIDS in their consequent effect on women and girls. By strengthening these interventions in the SADC region, we'll be making, as the South African Parliament and State, an important contribution to the fight against the process towards the eradication of gender-based violence. We support the call by the subcommittee for a comprehensive legal and policy framework across SADC as an extremely useful intervention in the campaign. This will require our parliament to provide leadership given that we have such policy and legislation in abundance, and this can be usefully shared with our colleagues in the SADC parliament. Neither must be reinvent the wheel. We have the SADC strategy and framework of action for addressing gender-based violence 2018 to 2030. This framework of action we need to be actively promoting, which when we consider what it is the framework much if it has been generated by ourselves. It's 5 objectives of preventing an early identification of gender-based violence, delivering of effective and accessible protection, care and support services to gender-based violence victims, capacity development for effective and efficient and effective response to gender-based violence, information and knowledge management, including effective coordination, networking, and partnership building are all matters that we are familiar with. Our national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide embodies most of what is in the recommendation of the subcommittee. What lies ahead is how we integrate this work with the initiatives of the parliament in the SADC region. This is the test that our parliament must rise to, and the multi-party women's caucus should be seized with this. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you. I will now recognize the Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Thank you, Honourable House Chair. I move that the report be adopted.
The motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections? No objections agreed to. This, the Secretary will read the 4th order.
Consideration of report of virtual SADC Parliamentary Forum, SADC PF Stakeholder Consultative Session with Committee Chairpersons on Development of SADC Model Law and Public Finance Management.
Thank you. I will now call on the Honourable Ntombela to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, House Chair. The ANC welcomes the deliberations that have taken place at the Stakeholder Consultative Session on the development of SADC Model Law on Public Finance Management. The SADC Parliamentary Forum has, in the last decade, been developing a Bill of Rights in the form of successive model laws, which are standard-setting instruments to facilitate domestication and advocacy exercises in view of the enactment of similar norms at the domestic level. These norms can take the form of regulations, laws, or administrative guidelines, which are done under authority of law. The SADC Model Law on Public Finance Management is the very first model law that speaks to financial and economic issues, an area yet unexplored by the Forum and its membership. As a SADC Model Law on Public Finance Management, it is the first of its kind in the world, and the Forum is thus stepping towards the discovery of a completely new territory of norms in financial management. What is important about the particular session, Chair, is that it is taking forward in an interconnected manner a model of public finance management alongside other work that is being carried out on financial crimes. That whilst the proposed public finance management model law only deals with management of public finances, there is, through stakeholder engagement, an entire network under the SADC Parliamentary Forum, which connects the management of finance to other operations in the region. That deals with different forms of financial crimes. The model law, which is an initiative of SADC-PF to bring about uniformity in the management of finances across the region, is designed not only to strengthen accountability over the use of public finances, but also facilitates easier cooperation between law enforcement agencies to track money laundering, corruption, financing of terrorism, etc. The model law of public finance management, therefore, Chair, does not contain anything to do with prosecution of matters which regard to illicit financial actions. So, what is our responsibility as South African Parliament? Firstly, the four respective chairpersons of Finance, Appropriations, Auditor General, and Scoper need to come together and deliberate on the final draft model law on public finance management and submit their comments back to the subcommittee on the content. Secondly, whilst we recognize that prosecutors are not involved in policy processes concerning model law, it is expected that prosecutors across SADC lend their support to push for domestication of prosecution policy regarding public finance management related offenses. Thirdly, Honourable Chair, we will need cohesion and cogency with National Treasury around the model law. The impact of both the Public Finance and Municipal Management Acts in terms of its scope provide a useful reference to the content of the model law. Fourthly, and finally, is the critical role of the Office of the Auditor General, who can advise on international best practices and policies for the SADC model law and benchmarking, especially with financial or revenue-related treaties signed by a member state. Once ratified in the SADC Parliamentary Forum, we will, as Parliament, be called upon to participate in domestication initiatives of the dedicated organ of SADC-PF, notably the Regional Parliamentary Model Laws Oversight Committee. The ANC support the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now recognize political parties that wish to make declarations, starting with the DA. It gets too left for you, so. Thank you. Hanan.
Chair, imagine a tribe of desert dwellers that you get together and then you ask them to make laws on long distance swimming. Well, this is kind of the same absurdity that this report deals with. A virtual session between the SADC, the South African Development Community chairpersons, on the development of model law for public finance management. Perhaps the most entertaining part of this report or event is that the keynote speaker was a Zimbabwean MP, Mr. Brian Dube. Imagine that. The keynote speaker at a meeting where they apparently met to make model laws on public finance management was a representative of one of the countries that possibly has the worst public finance management record on earth. Chairperson, to put in context how serious the South African chairpersons took the session, you only must look at the South African delegation that attended the session, which not one was a South African MP. So let's not waste any more time reflecting on SADC model laws, but that no one will take seriously, when in our own country, taking the law seriously is already a serious problem. Consider this very venue where we are meeting today and for the last 8 months. According to sections 59 and 72 of the Constitution, the highest law in the land, both the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces must facilitate public involvement in the process of the National Assembly and conduct its business in a manner that is accessible to the public. This venue, where we are sitting today, is only accessible to 120 of the 400 members of Parliament, not to even mention the media or the public. Chair, that's what the highest law in the land says. Yet here we are, 8 months later, in total contrast to what the law requires. And once again, the DA will have to take the ANC government to court to make them implement the law so that we can have a venue where all 400 members of Parliament, the public and the media are welcome and can take part. Then, of course, there is section 197.3 of the Constitution, which states that no employee of the public service may be favored or prejudiced only because that person supports a particular political party or cause. That's the law. Yet, for the last 25 years, the governing party have boldly ignored this part of the law with their brazen use of cadre deployment, which appoints ANC cadres in the public service based on ANC membership, in direct contravention of the Constitution. So, once again, the DA has taken the ANC to court to finally have cadre deployment rule unconstitutional by a court. So the ANC can, after 25 years, stop ignoring the very clear and simple letter of the law. Then, of course, Chair, there are also those little pesky exchange control regulations that require all foreign currency transactions are reported to an authorized foreign exchange dealer within 30 days, whether they are in a pala couch or not. So time will tell if our own president was bothered enough to abide by these laws. You see, Chair, laws can be made, but they are worthless if the governing party itself chooses which laws applies to them or not. This report is laughable, an attempt to make SADC model laws, and we reject the report. Thank you.
The EFF.
Enkosi Sihlalo, it's unfortunate that I have to speak after such an attack on Africanism. But I will deal, Pan-Africanism, unfortunately, you will not comprehend it. I take too much big offense when you insult that a Zimbabwean was the one speaking on the issue of financial management. Well, Zimbabwe has got very high standards of education. And therefore, a Black person can speak on matters of financial management. A Black person can produce a law. You can't come here and tell us that we can speak on Pan-Africanism. House Chairperson, the current legislation that governs public finance management here in South Africa and many of SADC members, if not all, was informed by either self-imposed neoliberalism or by neoliberal imposed by the World Bank and the IMF. This is why even after many years of independence, the majority of countries continue to support public finance management that seeks to entrench fiscal austerity, privatization of strategic assets in the name of market efficiency and misguided faith in the private sector. As we seek to develop a model law on public financial management with prosecutors involved in the prosecution of financial crime and related offenses, we must first go back and fix the basis.
Many will be shocked that once we have a model law that takes domestic conditions into account, the majority of SADC member states be prosecuting mostly illicit financial flows, base erosion, and profit shifting instead of typical misdemeanors of minor misconducts. We first have to find a coherent model law that protects revenues lost because of illicit financial flows before we put measures in place to ensure effective management of public finance, including prosecution of financial crimes. We must also ensure that we incorporate localization in the model law to stimulate the procurement of locally produced goods by member states, even those that are coming from Zimbabwe. What is encouraging is that SADC member states agree that as much as it's a model law for public finance management is needed, we must first fix the foundation of fiscal policy to avoid revenue loss because of illicit financial flows. The EFF supports the report and encourages all political parties to review the draft documentation circulated. Mamu Pilankulu earlier on mentioned the stance of the ANC in their conference about the African trade. It's very unfortunate that the trading between ourselves and the free trade agreement that Africa has entered into is going to be very difficult if we do not acknowledge each other's rights. What we have seen with a woman of Zimbabwe being reminded that you do not belong here and therefore the health benefits of this country are not going to be benefiting you. It's wrong. If we sit here as SADC member states, we must agree and guarantee each other that you will be safe when you come to trade in South Africa, you're coming from a member state. You will be safe to be in South Africa if you are coming from Africa. That is why we can have people who undermine us this much from the right, those that are still going to come here to advance the neoliberal ideas with the IMF and the World Bank. We will take that and believe it's true. Let's always take that with a pinch of salt. We support.
Thank you. IFP. The IFP. Proceed, Honourable Member.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson. Honourable Chairperson, I did not serve on this committee, but from what I read about this and the report, my understanding is that a model law is being developed to ensure that SADC national parliaments are able to conduct their legislative, budgetary and oversight functions for public financial management in a way that is transparent, efficient and responsive to the needs of SADC citizens. A model law is one that is drafted centrally to be disseminated and suggested for enactment in multiple independent legislatures, one being ours. The model law, as we believe, is an opportunity for SADC member states to identify and close any policy, legal and regulatory gaps, allowing best practices to emerge, to tighten resources mobilization, set standards, and harmonize regulations across the region. South Africa is losing between $3.5 to $5 billion a year, which is more than 1% of its GDP, to illicit financial flows. The model law will create an opportunity for finance entities owned by states to have a clear advisory role and provide solutions. This law seeks to narrow the ambit of reports under the scrutiny of the Public Accounts Committee, enforce stronger regulation of public sector debt, strengthen the enforcement for regulation of public sector debt, hold entities accountable for the lack of performance-based budget with clear key performance indicators, and address the existing disconnect between international commitments and budgeting by national parliaments. These issues are also matters that South Africa is dealing with. There needs to be consultation on the issue of the proposed debt ceiling especially for a country such as ours, which has a developmental agenda and is experiencing natural disasters and recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. The report, as I read, Honourable Chairperson, refers to matters that need further deliberation and discussion. It highlights that further discussion is needed on public accounts committees, not being dominated by the ruling party, and how this should work in practice. And the matter of the powers of ministers when borrowing need to be looked at, and also the provision for special funds and taxes needs to be included, notably in terms of how these can be monitored by parliaments. All in all, I think this is an ideal opportunity for us to learn from each other, from each other's parliament, and share best practices. The IFB accepts the report. Thank you.
Thank you. FF plus?
No declaration, Chairperson.
Thank you. ACGP?
No declaration, thank you.
Thank you. UDM?
Ma'am.
ATM? Thank you. Good. NFP?
Thank you, Chairperson. Yeah, the National Freedom Party will support this report, not because we are convinced that this will be implemented, that they will ensure that they will put good governance.
Order. Honourable Chabalala Judith. Order. Mute your mic. Proceed, Honourable Member.
Yeah, Chairperson, they need some management, I can see.
No, I've been saying it for too long now.
Yeah. Chairperson, yeah, whilst we will welcome any initiative to put measures in place to ensure there is compliance, there's consequence management. In fact, consequence management should be the last thing. What we should be putting measures in place to prevent this corruption, maladministration, looting. Now, all these countries in the SADC region got some public finance management systems in place. South Africa has got, and I think through some of the educational tours we've been to, and they've told us that we've got some of the best systems in the world. The problem we have is that we are not willing to implement them and make sure there's consequences to those people who do not apply and do the right thing. That's the problem we're actually sitting. But Chairperson, having said this, my experience with SADC is this, and I must agree with the member from the DA, this is not anything to do with race. Motion after motion, model law after model law after model law is adopted, and that's it. You never ever hear about it again. It goes into file 13, lots of money is spent. In fact, lots of taxpayers' money is spent. We go there, we spend time in the hotels, we do everything. But the question is, what do we achieve ultimately? Very little, I can tell you. The challenges that we face in the SADC region, and I'm not undermining the work, that the intentions are very good. Very, very good. The SADC team wants to do more. But the problem is that from the time you implemented them or adopted it, to the time it goes to their countries, and for it to be implemented and come back and report, it never happens, Chairperson. So I hope that our colleagues that are on SADC will make sure that through their meaningful contribution, there's accountability at SADC. Whatever you adopt is implemented. There is reports that come in every time you meet, so that you can see that the work you're doing is yielding positive results. The NFP will support this. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. AIC, COPE, PAC, Al-Jama, the ANC.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson. The SADC Parliamentary Forum met on the 17th February 2022 to consult with national parliaments, chairpersons of relevant standing committees of parliament, including public accounts, finance, budget, anti-corruption and good governance committees, so as to finalize the draft SADC model law on public financial management. The SADC model law on public finance management will be first of its kind globally, and chairpersons of national finance related parliamentary committees are being consulted due to the important role they can play in the model laws
domestication. Their national parliaments will then be able to report to the forum on their parliaments processing of the model law. Central in the presentations was a SADC organization of public accounts, which promotes good governance through sharing knowledge and experiences to enhance parliamentary oversight. It systematically works among the public accounts committees on the 13 SADC parliaments who are members of the organizations. A memorandum of understanding will be concluded between the SADC Parliamentary Forum and the SADC organization of public accounts committees to strengthen cooperation, conduct joint research, facilitate capacity enhancement, hold annual joint working and review sessions, and conduct bilateral consultations. Following a presentation of the draft model on public finance management, it was outlined that the draft model law seeks to balance a number of issues, the key ones being balancing conflicting simplicity and certainty, being certain that everyone understands what the law requires, and the need to balance flexibility with clarity. The law needs to be easy, domesticate, allowing for flexibility and some domestic modifications. According to the report, delegates were informed that the consultation is part of a large process of engagement with various stakeholders, including from national parliaments. Emerging from the presentation, initial comments and questions that emerged were as follows: that the model law needs to expand on the appearance of witnesses before committees, although such provisions would need to consider national laws of privilege and self-incrimination when dealing with non-public officials. That more discussions in the appointment of the Auditor General is required in a number of member states. That the powers of ministers on borrowing needs to be looked at, and provisions for the special funds and taxes also need to be included, notably in terms of how this can be monitored by parliaments. And I want to encourage that the written report must be submitted timeously. This means that both finance committee chairs, both appropriation committee chairs, the chair of the Auditor General and the chair of Standing Committee on Public Accounts need to submit their comments on the model law as soon as possible. Thank you, House Chair.
Are there any objections to the report? Oh, sorry. Let me recognize the Chief Whip of the Majority Party. Sorry.
Thank you, House Chair. I move that the report be adopted.
Thank you very much. Are there any objections to the adoption? Yes.
House Chair, please note the objection of the DM.
Noted.
Chairperson and the objection of the FF plus.
Noted. With those objections, the report is thus agreed to. The Secretary will read the last order of the day.
Consideration of report of 52nd Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Conference, Africa Region, CPA Africa Region Conference.
I will now invite the Honourable Siminya to introduce the report. That's the name I have. Is it changed? Oh, I will now invite Honourable Hadebe. Thank you.
Thank you, House Chair. The Parliament of the Republic of South Africa, represented by the Deputy Speaker and the House Chairperson of International Relations in the NCOP, participated in the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, the CPA Executive Committee meeting held in Accra, Ghana in March 2022. The Executive Committee meeting was, amongst other things, to take stock and reflect on the extent of the implementation of resolution of the 51st CPA Africa Region Conference. Also to adopt the report of the ESCO, as well as to assess the business and the operation of the CPA Africa region insofar as the annual calendar of activities is concerned, and thereafter chart the way forward. The 6th Parliamentary Strategic Plan has set out the regional and international relation as one of its 5 strategic oversight plan for the term. Theme 5 of the oversight plan enjoins Parliament to play an important role in influencing and overseeing international and regional decision-making. In giving effect to the regional and international participation, the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa is affiliated and participates in the political activities of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association at both Africa region and international level. This participation fulfills one of Parliament's strategic objectives, premised on deepening and enhancing parliamentary international engagement and cooperation. The aim of the CPA is to promote knowledge and understanding of constitutional, legislative, economic, social, and cultural systems within the parliamentary democratic framework. The Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa and the regional representative from the Southern region reported on the activities undertaken by the Parliament of the Republic. That includes A, they convened Women's Day and completed the review on Women's Charter. The regional representative coordinated and presided over the launch of the CPA National Branch of the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. The regional representative attended the launch of the CPA in Mpumalanga Provincial Legislature and Limpopo Branch meeting program. Gauteng sub-branch of the CPA convened a gender sensitization training and social media training. The Eastern Cape CPA sub-branch held a men's conference in 2001 and organized a seminar in Observing Africa Day. KwaZulu-Natal CWP branch convened a women's parliament to commemorate the role of Charlotte Maxeke in women leadership. Western Cape CPA sub-branch convened a Women's Day seminar in 2001 in recognition of Women's Month. Amongst the observations made by the South African delegation are that the meeting was a resounding success on the basis that the executive committee member of CPA Africa region from South Africa, also prescribed in Article 28 of CPA Constitution, managed to attend and participate in all proceedings of the 82nd EXCO meeting in Ghana. The delegation also noted and congratulated the CPA Africa region treasurer, Honourable Ntombi Mungwe, for being part of the Thank you, Honourable Hope Papo. Treasurer Honourable Ntombi Mungwe, for being part of the office bearers in the term of Article 38 of the CPA Constitution, and the 82nd executive meeting was her maiden meeting to attend in her capacity as a treasurer following her election in November 2021 in Abuja, Nigeria. Some of the recommendations that were made in the report are, firstly, that the SA delegation should finalize the nomination and representation of sub-national branches to participate in the deliberation of CPA Executive Committee. The position became vacant owing to the election of Honourable Ntombi as the office bearer. Secondly, SA delegation must convene a preparatory meeting comprising of all delegates from national, sub-national branches to prepare for the state of readiness for the delegation to attend the 52nd conference to be held on the 3rd to the 9th of June in Sierra Leone. I thank you.
There's now opportunity for those wishing to make declaration. I'll start with the DA.
Thank you very much. My ANC colleague and I flew out of Africa only to fly back into Africa. And then after a day-long wait, we flew into Sierra Leone. Besides having an SAA flight directly fly next door, or 3 other continental flights at half the cost and time, our staff neglect came clear when 2 major pull-out banners featuring the face of our dear Deputy Speaker and the NCOP Chair, Honourable Masondo, filled the foyer with a huge heartwarming and welcoming sign surrounded by a cackle of excited parliamentary staff members promoting their imminent arrival. Talk about feeling like the VHS machine when the DVD player walks in. Due to the short time in the speech, I cannot go through everything, but safe to say that the only reason that my ANC sister and I got out of Sierra Leone or got our COVID-19 tests back in time for our flight was because of this call made to a speaker of another country by myself and my persistency. It is no exaggeration that our new speaker is lucky that one of us never came home in a wooden box because of the lack of her leadership and control. It was also by the saving grace of the Western Cape legislature that everything had some semblance of organization from our side. Our own staff members did well under the circumstances, and my fingers do not point at them. Being a diligent member of the PGRR group and wishing to protect future MPs from any danger, I wrote what I thought was a fair set of easy to understand questions to the people responsible for the welfare abroad, and to try and understand why poor provinces were paying nearly double the SNTs of our parliament. In true Helen Suzman style, I knew the answers already because I had done my homework, but I wanted to help the speaker in her office and the chair of the PGRR. Unfortunately for them, they had Nomfundo Sunjika respond. She either thought that I was 10 years old or that it would accept any insulting answer that she would give me. Let me tell you that Minister Thandi Modise would never have accepted a letter like this that was written. The official would have been disciplined in a second or lambasted in my presence. I make that letter available to anyone that requests it. Thankfully, the actual conference itself was a success because it covered key topics such as the fact that the CPA is registered as a charity and how it affects continuity and sustainability. It has been plaguing the African chapter for 2 decades. They have been close to resolve, but the UK Parliament seems to have brushed their last efforts off as a non-priority. I made a proposal that I believe would have been a win-win situation. All the parties that had heard it were excited and asked for it to please be presented in Canada, including the Secretary General. Unfortunately, due to my inquiry above, my ex-chief whip was miraculously sent a strongly insinuated letter that she send a female delegate to the Canadian AGM. Another opportunity lost, and again, officials playing politics. Under COVID-19, I pointed out that there was a more important role in trying to get a cohesive continental plan agreed that would see Africa work together and not against each other. During COVID, it was horrible to have to try rescue truck drivers caught between borders for days on end because one country locked out or the other locked in. We must be on the same pages for travel and regulation as a continent. It must not just be for COVID, but for any eventuality, and vaccinations cannot be enforced, but rather highly encouraged or incentivized. The Abuja Declaration can be our starting point. With regards to the intra-African trade discussion, I proposed a review of our double border systems. We could be cutting costs, clamping down on corruption, and protecting the lives and livelihood of vulnerable people such as old ladies with goods on their shoulders as they negotiate borders and no man's land on foot in the belligerent heat. I reiterated the need for African countries to invest in infrastructure that could push goods quicker and cheaply from borders in their countries from the one side to the other, so that we can grow our intra-Africa trade and build a sustainable African GDP. Overall, the trip was a success in terms of the actual work and networking. I believe it is important that politicians and officials must find one another on trips like this and ensure that each one is doing the job that their job description tasks them with doing. We have common objective when going on overseas trips, and we must support each other. It will be a sad day for the taxpayer if membership fees to bodies like this are paying officials to take advantage of a vacuum in political leadership, and trips like this become unproductive and suffer a lack of continuity or purpose. Unfortunately, with the loss of the previous speaker, it is possible that one can receive a letter like I did from Nomfundo Sunjika. Officials can be the politicians on multilateral trips, and we will need to bring Bibles
Thank you,
in front of them
Honourable
that we
Bergman, your
all
time
have a
is up.
fighting
Thank
chance of
you.
returning home safely. Thank you.
Thank you. The EFF.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, the economic freedom fighters represent a new generation of African activists and leaders who are characterized by our unconditional rejection of colonialism and institutions of neocolonialism that seek to keep African countries beholden to their former colonial masters, even after the end of formal colonialization of the continent. Here in this country, we are not blind to the enduring impacts of British colonialism, nor are we blind to its continued hold over those who hold political power in the country. We reject any association or celebration of whatever institutional heritage we may have inherited from our former colonial masters. The Commonwealth Parliamentary Association was previously known as the Empire Parliamentary Association, which was founded in 1911 and has had as its ceremonial head as the Queen of Britain. It aims to promote good governance, respect for the Constitution and democracy. Chairperson, South Africa and the rest of the formerly colonized nations from which Britain extracted immeasurable wealth and caused immense pain have nothing to learn from Britain or any institution associated with Britain. The commitment to democracy and good governance in the eyes of Commonwealth means the maintenance of past and present architecture of oppression, not disturbing colonially acquired property rights, and keeping the racist nature of our neo-colonial economy. We did not participate in this Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, therefore, and condemn the present leadership of our parliament for being willing neo-colonial subjects who will do nothing and everything to be accepted by the former colonial masters. Therefore, Chairperson, we see how the current president is busy parading and being excited in Britain, and it serves nothing for South Africa. We therefore reject this report, Chairperson.
Thank you. The IFP, Shenge.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. We've been entrusted by our people to represent them and to do so very well. It is with this trust that we make and preserve legislations and decisions that reflect their interests and voices. Our people are the most vital component in parliamentary structure, and every decision that we make, we must have that in mind. We have to play our part in building a more robust and more secure democratic country through collaboration, willingness with our people, each other, and countries with the same goals to ensure that democracy is respected and upheld. COVID-19 has deeply affected and broken down many of our social and economic systems throughout the continent, pushing us to adopt new ways of doing things. It's also exposed us to lack of preparedness to counter any threat or risk that exacerbate the vulnerability of our people, and also, which is more importantly, exposed us to how resilient we are as people. Our post-recovery plan should be strong enough to create an enabling environment for our people to rebuild their lives, and we can only do so through willingness and capacity to adapt to change and proactive service delivery. The report speaks to ways of trying to encounter unforeseen circumstances. However, our focus as African countries should go beyond just putting systems in place, rather work on how quickly we are to respond to calamities and to implement those systems. We can have disaster plans in place, but if we are not able to readily execute it when need arises, then those plans are not effective and are null and void. On the issue of women and youth, we have lamented on the inclusion of women and youth and the importance of their representation across many platforms. What is confusing, Honourable Chairperson, is that there's been the same conversation about this issue for a long period of time. However, we still have not reached our goals in increasing women and youth participation. This shows a clear discord between what we are doing and what we are saying as citizens and leaders of our respective countries. The conversation that we should have must be directed to what is it that we are not doing to ensure that women and youth are included. We all know women and youth make up the majority of the population, but yet make the minority that is elected. We have noted the CPA's prioritization of to change their status from charity organization to an international organization. However, it's important to register that the association has the autonomy to determine its course and to engage and exist without remodeling itself to fit with the international lens. Even with how we define our African continent, it should reflect and speak to our very own nature as we house multiple informal and rural economies and township economies. It is through our people and the business at their nature that we can grow our economy. People have given us power, so we must use this very power to benefit them and to make them stronger to compete globally.
Thank you.
Thank you. The IFP supports the report.
Thank you. FF Plus.
No declaration, House Chair.
Thank you. ACDP.
No declaration, thank you.
Thank you. UDM. ATM. Good.
Kekana, Mama. Aye, Kekana.
I'm here, ma'am. I'm here.
Kekana.
Ndabezitha.
Jabule.
Thank you.
Enkosi.
Thank you. Thank you.
United.
Honorable, I think it's Dr. Mkabane. Please check your mic and mute. Proceed, Ndabezitha.
Siyabulela mhlali ngaphambili.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Oh.
Kwenzeka nini?
Oh, is the interpreter now?
What is
interpreter? Now is procedural officer. Kan kwenze njani babunkwankwa kwangena wena kwamoshakala?
Bafuna undibhukuqa ngeke balungi.
Thuba ke.
Chairperson, thank you very much. I-United Democratic Movement ayixhasi le report ngezizathu ezibangela ukuthi akusekho sidingo zezinto ezifana ne-Commonwealth Parliamentary Associations ezizama ukuqhubeka nendlela ababesenza ngayo abo babesicinezele kulo Mzantsi Afrika. Okwesibini into ba sithetha sibaninzi Chairperson apha.
Interpreter, I don't know what is happening with your cables or whatever, please.
Mkhuphe endlini mama. Awutolika pha ngaphandle.
Kuba baba, kuzwakala wena kakhulu siyakuzwa.
Oh inkosi. Le nto le Commonwealth Parliamentary Association kuba nje abo babesiphethe kakubi ngexesha localucalulo bafuna ukuqhubeka besixela ukuthi makwenzeke ntoni. Eyona nto thina isikhwanqisayo into ekudala siyithetha umhla nezolo yokuba awukwazi ukuba ne-Commonwealth Parliamentary Association noba ke bungayivumela na charitable association edibenise khona naseLondon engayo international organization. Siyayingqina into yoba yayifanele itshintshiwe kodwa utshintshwa nje into engasoze ikwazi ukusebenzela iAfrika nokuphuhlisa thina. Sibona sekuthethwa apha nge-subscription fees ezibhatalwayo by the 64 branches. Sihoye siququzelela i-subscription fees kwi-CPA kodwa i-legal status ayikalungiswa. Okwesibini sibe singakhange ibe kanti kwi-Afrika ngakumbi EU sine-member states ezininzi kwi-African Union ezingabhataliyo ii-fees zazo ze-membership fees ezibangela ukuthi kuxhomekekwe kwii-countries ezimbalwa ukuze kwazi ukwenziwa into ze-African Union. Ndawoni yoba sihoye ezi zilapha kufutshane kuthi zifuna uba ziphuhlise iAfrika silibele zinto zabelungu bangapha phesheya abangenaxesha lethu abafuna usenza nje oopokopana babo bamane befuna ukuthi senze izinto ezithandwa ngabo. Ngezo zizathu asiyixhasi thina le report, siyibona le nto njengonobenani nomdlalo kapuca.
Thokoze mhlonishwa. That was UDM, ATM, good. NFP? NFP usasekhona? AIC, COPE, PAC, Al-Jama, the ANC.
Dumedisha Motswara Ntloye Kgoro maloko a palamente e hlomphegileng. Really, for African National Congress, we support the report of the CPA Executive Committee meeting. As a member of the International Community of Nations, the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa play a pivotal role in the international parliamentary affairs. This is to ensure the strengthening
of democracy at the international level through multilateralism. The meeting reflected on the matters that affect women, especially the representation of women in legislatures. To quote the Vice President of Ghana, as he said, I quote, "Practices that affect women, children, and marginalized in society should no longer be considered as economic or social issues, but as issues that have direct correlation with democratic governance." The Vice President went further to say, "It is a democratic imperative that men support the representation of women and the marginalized in governance." Close quote. The observation, however, is that the trend of underrepresentation of women in legislatures is changing across the globe, and as a result, this should be perpetuated and sustained support for women to ensure their increased representation and participation in all spheres of government and parliament. It is worth noting that the top 10 countries in the world with the highest representation of women in parliament, of which the 3 are from the Commonwealth, and they are Rwanda with 56% of women in parliament, our South Africa with 44% of women in parliament, and the Mozambique with 39% of women in parliament. This observation also reflects on our case as South African parliament. We should strive to ensure parity in the participation and representation of women in parliament. In this regard, we applaud the African National Congress for taking a lead as far as women representation is concerned in this parliament. We affirm that the report by the Deputy Speaker of Parliament of South Africa and the regional representative of the Southern region on the activities undertaken by the Parliament of South Africa. We support the recommendation made in the report, including the finalization of the nomination of the representative of sub-national branches to participate in the deliberation of the CPA Executive Committee. On the preparation of the state of readiness for the delegation to attend the 52nd conference to be held from the 3rd June in Sierra Leone. The ANC support the report. I thank you.
Ra leboga, Magorena. I will now recognize the Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. I move that the report be adopted.
Thank you. Are there any objections?
The EFF objects.
Thank you. Any other? Honorable members.
The UDM also objects, Chair.
Thank you. With those objections, the report is thus agreed to. May we stand? Honorable members, I request you to stand and wait for the chair and the maids to leave the chamber. The House is now adjourned.